What are y'all doing in my kitchen? Michelle, what y'all doing in my kitchen? No, hi. Old School Nerd here. Let me just turn this camera up so you guys can see that I'm here. Hey, Old School Nerd. And Chewy. Chewy's here. Chewy will not be cooking because Chewy's a dog. And he eats, he doesn't cook. Isn't that right? That's right, we don't cook. All right, we're going to put you down so I can wash my hands because guess what? I just rubbed on the dirty dog. That dirty, dirty dog. Okay, get out. Hey everybody, Old School Nerd here. Okay, this is a little bit of a different stream than normal. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Hold on, just give me one moment, please. Oh, there you are. Awesome. All right, Norser's here. We got a few other people on the stream. We're going to have ourselves a good time. Hi. I'm Old School Nerd, like I said before. And, hey, Norser, can you hear me okay? Let me know if you can hear me okay. Just want to make sure I'm not too loud, not too soft. You know, Goldilocks, kind of in the middle. Okay. Okay, here we go. So what we're going to do today is, I'm going to turn down the music first. So what we're going to do today, perfect, okay. I'm Cajun. I am completely 100% Cajun. Born and raised. My mother was a LeBlanc and my dad was a Patin. Yeah. So it's legit. Born and raised. And in this kitchen right here, my mother would attempt to make good food. Attempt to make good food. My mother's not a horrible cook. She's just not very... Okay, my mom can't cook worth spit, but that's okay. I still love her. And that's pretty common. In South Louisiana, you have moms, and they all cook, and they cook very well. But Dad cooks on special occasions. And when Dad cooks, it's something different. Yeah, Chewy, that's right. When men get in the kitchen, it's different. Isn't that right, buddy? That's right. So anyway, the way it works is all the men in my family could cook. All of them. So it's pretty common that men do a lot of Cajun cooking right here. I'm going to need you to be quiet, okay? So I'm going to handle it. One second. You're going to have to be quiet. Where was I? Okay, so men in my family cook, and I was taught to cook Cajun types of food from my own grandfather and from my grand uncle, his brother. And my uncle Floyd, actually my grand uncle Floyd, lived in a town called Roux. And Roux is where Jake Delhomme is from and a few other celebrities. But it is one of the core areas in this place. It's the crawfish capital of the world. It's also where I learned how to cook. So what we're going to do is, in Cajun cooking, there are really two types of techniques that you need to learn how to do before you can really do anything in Cajun cooking. The best part about Cajun cooking is it's very adaptable. Almost anyone can do it. Now, if you're a foodie like Norser and a few other people in the channel, and you're kind of very particular about what you eat, and that's fine. Whatever rules in cooking that you're used to, ignore them. Anthony Bourdain came down to Roux and Lafayette and this part of Louisiana. And he went to a boucherie, which is where the village would get together, multiple families would get together, butcher a pig. They would butcher a pig, and then once they butcher the pig, they would literally use everything to make different dishes throughout the day for the entire neighborhood to eat. And his exact words were, they break every rule of French cooking, bastardize them, destroy them, and resurrect them in an amazing culinary glory that I have never seen before in my life. He fell in love with Cajun food by coming here. because he realized how adaptable we were and we didn't care about rules. When the Cajuns came down here from Canada, they almost died because they couldn't farm. They could only trap and catch seafood and hunt, which they were good at. But disease was tearing them apart, and you can only live so much in this environment without certain skills. Fortunately for them, they met some German settlers as well, the Zonebreakers, and they live in the Crowley area just west of here. They're descendants, and the culture survived and thrived. Because we can't grow certain things here, one thing that we can definitely grow here is rice. So one of the common things you're going to see in Cajun cooking is whatever over rice. This over rice. And if it walked, swam, crawled, flew, or grew out of the ground, we put it over rice. So that'll be the staple. If you're not a rice eater, that's totally fine. We can change it up. Like I said, we're very adaptable. So one of the things you're going to do is, if you're not a rice person, but you're a potato person, no problem. So am I. I'm a fat boy. I'm a fat boy because I like to eat. So one of the things you're going to do is, if you don't want to do rice, that's fine. I will give you a little bit of information during the cooking demonstration on when you can add potatoes, carrots, like you would a traditional beef pot roast, and still give it that authentic Cajun flair to it that will really be a hit at the house. Now, a misconception that everyone has is everything we do in Cajun cooking is hot. That's not true. It's there are certain things that some Cajuns love hot, and there are certain things that some Cajuns don't like hot at all. For instance, I don't necessarily like things that are so spicy that they make my nose run and all I taste is a spice. However, my late uncle, he would make food so spicy that if he threw it outside, the stray cats wouldn't eat it. I'm not kidding. I was there. But that's how he liked it. Nobody else did, but that's how he liked it. Again, adaptable. So this is what we're going to do. It's called deglazing. Remember I told you there's two main skills you have to learn before you do anything else? One, deglazing. The second, roux bases, making a roux. Now we're not going to make a roux today. That'll be another stream when we go something along with a gumbo or an étouffée or a coubillon, a bunch of different Cajun words. But whatever the case is, making a roux is different than deglazing. Both are used similar in that we put them over rice in a stew type formula. But with a roux, you're going to take flour and either butter or an oil. In some cases, some people use lard because, you know, they just don't care. And you brown the flour until it becomes a rich brown. Now, Cajuns don't do anything halfway. And to do this, for this particular recipe, if you're doing your prep right now, for this recipe, you're going to need 1 diced yellow onion, 1/2 of a normal size green bell pepper, 1 stalk of celery chopped fine, and either garlic powder or minced garlic. You can actually have some fresh parsley added to it, but just a little bit. You don't have to do that. That's for flair. Some people do it, some people don't. The other thing you're going to need is a heavy pot. We don't cook lightweight because what we're going to do when I tell you about deglazing or when you cook with a roux, you're going to use high heat. And any pan or stock pot that is thin will not be able to work because it will not hold the heat well. And every time you try to transfer the heat across the surface of the cooking area, it's just going to permeate and burn the food, which you don't want to do. The reason why Cajuns use very heavy cookware, 2 reasons. Traditionally, you pass them on. But 2, because a heavier pot will dissipate the heat evenly and keep the food from burning. One of the keys to deglazing and making a roux is you have to bring it almost to a burn and pull it back. Anthony Bourdain said they destroy every French cooking rule in the world, destroy them, bastardize them, and then bring them back in a sort of culinary glory. That's what we're going to do. I have 3 ways that you can do this at home. Not everyone is going to have these things. If you have a black iron pot, use that. Some of the best rice and gravies I've ever had, black iron pot. I don't have a black iron pot here, and that's okay. We're going to use the one that I use every single day. This is called a Magnolite. This is a common cooking pot that we have here in South Louisiana. You can find them other places as well. They're not cheap. That's a legit pot. It doesn't even make a pot sound like a bong sound because it's so thick on the bottom. It literally, it's just a knock sound. They dissipate heat very well. They season well, and they do a very good job. They have a heavy tom lid that actually seals up fairly well, allows steam to escape, but you can adjust it to where it slowly cooks things down. The other type that people use, and I will not be using for this because this is only for tonight's dinner, is one of these. This is a roaster. Some people have roasters for turkeys, roasts, ducks, geese, whatever you're cooking, and they're fairly large. But mainly you're putting them in the oven to bake things. Everything I did with that heavy Magnolite pot, I can do with this big monster. Same type of pan. Again, you don't hear that pot pounding, that gong sound because it's extremely thick on the bottom. This thing can make some food. But for a single 1 pound roast, it's a little bit overkill. Now you're gonna say, old school nerd, I don't have either one of those, and I don't have a black iron pot. It's okay, because all you gotta do is go down to Walmart or Safeway or Target. It doesn't matter what store you go to. They got these roasting pots. Non-stick, simple, lid, vented top. You can do this in this and do a good job. I do it all the time. The key behind deglazing, we can use almost any protein in the world, except for delicate ones like fish. You don't want to do this with fish unless you know what you're doing. And that is going to be a little bit of a different recipe that I'll show you later. I can do this next recipe, deglazing, with pork chops, pork roast, pork loin, beef of any cut. And when I say any cut, I can take a round steak and make it better than the giant roast I have ready to go, if you know what you're doing. You can do this with chicken. It's a little bit harder because deglazing chicken is harder because of the blood content. I hate to say it, if that disgusts you, I'm sorry. But when you're browning meat, most of the time the best stuff that browns is red meat because of the blood. That's just life, sorry. So if you're gonna use one of these, fine, but remember, it's non-stick, so you don't wanna use metal. Use wood, use plastic. I would say use wood. Something along the lines of one of these to deglaze the bottom, and I'll show you why. But for this particular cooking surface, got to use something non-stick that doesn't destroy your non-stick pan and put it everywhere and scratch it up. Can't use metal, but you would use something like this. Since we're using this spatula, it's literally flimsy little spatula, $2, any store. And that's all you need. But the reason why I'm using metal is one simple reason. Part of the deglazing process is as things cook and they brown, they're gonna stick to this metal. Now there's two ways we're gonna get it off. One is by the deglazing process, which is a chemical reaction between a colder liquid to the hot surface. The other one is if it doesn't work and we get in a bind, we will scrape the bottom to make sure it doesn't burn. So essentially, if I do it right, I won't need this. If I get too far afield because I'm talking like an idiot and I keep rambling because I don't shut up, I may need this. Okay, so first off, you should already be doing your prep. You should be chopping up your onion. Hey, and don't let it get twisted. I will use a slap chop too if I have to. One yellow onion, half of your bell pepper, clean that out. You want to get your celery done. Now here's the thing. Cajuns got this stuff locked. If you live down here, we don't have to do all this prep work like you do. if I was to do all those ingredients together and mix them in the right proportions, I would have a mix that looked like this. Yellow onion, bell pepper, a little bit of celery, a little bit of garlic, ready to go. Down here in South Louisiana, you can buy it pre-cut, pre-chopped in the right proportion, ready to go at the store. You keep it frozen, thaw it out, throw it in there, you're ready to go. Yeah, that kind of sucks. We are that lazy, but we ain't got that kind of time. Okay, now, the other thing that is a go-to for Cajun kitchens, and some Cajuns don't use this because they think of it as being a cheat. Just like some Cajuns don't use a roux that comes in a jar. But let's be honest, not everybody has that kind of time, and not everybody is careful enough to do the proportions right every time. We have something called this, Tony Chachere's. This is a Creole seasoning, but a lot of Cajuns use it. It's a mixture of these ingredients. Salt or rock salt, do whichever one you want. Red pepper, cayenne pepper. Black pepper, and garlic. Whether you use minced garlic or garlic powder, it doesn't matter. It's a matter of preference, whichever one you want. But in the right proportions, you get this. And this is what we use. Now, a lot of people that see this video will not have that. So let's do this proportion out right. Okay. Have my container. And this is going to be a 1 teaspoon. This is a half a teaspoon. So for every 1 teaspoon of salt I put in the container, I'm going to do a half a teaspoon of the red pepper, a half a teaspoon of the black pepper. Wrong container. Forgot I bought a new one. Half a teaspoon of black, and a half a teaspoon of the garlic powder. Okay. Now, if I mix all of this up together in these proportions, and I take this pre-mixed stuff, they are pretty much identical. So, if you don't have Tony Chachere's or a Cajun blend of seasoning, it's okay. The proportion is 1 portion of salt, 1/2 portion of red pepper, 1/2 portion of black pepper, 1/2 portion of garlic, and that's your seasoning mix. That's it. Nothing crazy. Nobody said Cajuns have to do it hard, but that's what we're going to do. Okay. Now, before you start chopping up everything, if you're already chopping and getting all your stuff done, or if you're already done, great. But for those who haven't, let's start with the first thing we got to do, and that's the meat. What we're using today is a 1 pound shoulder roast. Now it's thawed out completely, and what we're going to do now is we're going to take this roast and we're going to take some olive oil. Now some people like to use melted butter, vegetable oil, whatever else. I'm an olive oil guy, and the reason why I love olive oil is because olive oil has a very good burn temperature. You'll usually know that olive oil is getting too hot and will start to smoke before it develops a burned flavor in the oil. This is another way to keep yourself from messing things up. So I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of this olive oil to the top of the roast. Some people can put a 1/4 cup. It's totally up to you. Once you do that, you're going to take the seasoning mix that we made, or if you can find Tony Chachere's at the grocery store, use that. And we're going to put a 1/2 cup on the top. Now, 1/2 cup seems like a lot, and it is. But again, we're trying to get the flavors. We're going to put that in the pan. Once we do that, we're going to kind of dry rub it, even though there's oil in here. And we're going to really just move this stuff around. And we're going to let it sit. Now that I moved that around, it's going to look like this. Now, as you can see, it's sitting in the olive oil, it's permeating, we're letting it sink into the meat. And we're going to let it sit here for a little bit, because we have other things to do. Don't worry about getting your hands dirty, it's totally fine. Okay, Now, our next step, we're going to let the meat sit for just a little bit because we have one more thing we need to talk about. Stock. When you're deglazing, there's really only 3 things you can use. You can use chicken stock, beef stock, or water. If you don't have beef stock, use chicken stock. If you don't have chicken stock, use water. If you don't have water, you should find civilization, because without water you'll die in a few days. So I just have my beef stock in this container right now because, well, it was simple and easy. But I have my beef stock in a container ready to go at room temperature. And this is the reason why. Remember when we talked about deglazing? Here's our catch. When you deglaze something, it's the temperature change that causes the gristle and the browning that is stuck to the pan to release. If your beef stock is refrigerated, the temperature change will be too much and you'll cause a popping sensation and possibly cause so much steam you could burn yourself. Don't be that person. If some French chefs will always keep their stock pot at a steam or a stemp just below boiling in a warming tray. And that's because they don't want to separate different ingredients that have combined in the cooking process. Remember what I said? We're going to break every French rule. We're not going to heat the stock because we want it to be a different temperature. Because when the room temperature broth hits the bottom of the pan, you're going to see a reaction occur where the browning literally comes off the pan without you having to scrape or anything, and it develops a dark gravy or drippings, as they say in the north, from the bottom of the pan. Now, some places will create a roast and they use the drippings on the bottom, add a little flour, stir it, and that's a gravy. We're not going to do that. We're going to use a dripping gravy that we're going to literally heat, deglaze, heat, deglaze as many times as it takes till we get enough gravy to serve with the roast as the topping. Now, some people will use gravy as I guess you could say, an accoutrement to a vegetable. Some people will make dripping gravy to put over potatoes. That's fine, but that's a side. The gravy literally becomes part of the main entree over rice. When I said that rice was a main component of our diet, I'm not kidding. We don't just use rice as the side. The rice is part of the main meat course. Now, this gives 2 reactions and 2 complications to things. Cajun cooking is not necessarily the healthiest form of cooking. It's not. I'll admit it, it isn't. But it doesn't mean that you can't make adjustments to how you do things and what types of proteins you use. And if you're, instead of using certain oils or lards and everything, I use olive oil. You can keep it to where it's as healthy as possible. But the best way to keep Cajun cooking healthy and not let it get you fat and lazy like myself, which I'm getting better by the way, is this. Eat in a bowl like this, not like this, would really be helpful. I'm just saying, okay? I see people who will cook and eat out of a bowl like this instead of something like this. This will keep you alive. This will lead to heart problems. For a lot of us, it's not about what we eat. It's our freaking portion control, people. How do you say? I have a real struggle eating a half a cup of broccoli, but I'll eat 5 pieces of fried chicken in one sitting. Okay, so let's start the process. We have everything chopped up. It's setting in bowls, ready to go. If you don't have that done yet, it's okay, you're fine. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put just a little bit of olive oil in the bottom of the pot. Now, I have a glass top electric range. Some people have gas. Now, if you have gas, there's Beano, Alka-Seltzer, Pepto, gas range. If you have a gas range, that's fine. Most people who are foodies and love to cook and stuff, they prefer gas. Chefs prefer gas. Why? because of the amount of control you have on the heating source. You can literally stop the heat at a moment's notice. If you don't have one, that's fine. You can always just move the freaking pot to something that's not on. Probably the same thing. So we're gonna do that. Now, I have put olive oil in the bottom of the pan. Now, in this pot, it's gonna heat up pretty hot. Now, once we do that, we're going to put the roast directly into the pot. Now, I'm not just gonna take this bowl and put it in the sink, rinse it out, and put it away. We don't lose, use, abuse, or misrepresent anything we're doing. There's more than just the roast in the bottom of this bowl. There's any residual juices and the rest of the marinade. We're not wasting anything. We're gonna go ahead and let the range heat up. Once it gets to a certain level and it's hot, we're gonna put it in there. Then we're gonna take our stock out of this thing and we're gonna pour it in this bowl. When we pour it in the bowl, we'll use a spoon or a ladle and stir it in there and get all of the spice and rub and everything that's left over in there into the deglazing base. And then we'll use a ladle and then we'll start the deglazing process. Now, this is the most important part. This is the most intensive part. The browning and deglazing is everything is this part. Once you're done with this part, it's literally a matter of turning the heat down and just letting it cook down for a few hours. You don't have to, I like to. The longer it cooks down, the more tender the meat is, the more rich the flavor, and the better it is. Now, for deglazing, again, you can do this with pork, you can do it with chicken. If you do it with chicken, please use bone-in dark meat chicken because it has a little bit more fat content. Breast meat does not work well for this. You can also do this with sausage, which is another recipe I want to show you guys how to make sausage and potatoes Cajun style. It is something that for all of my friends out there that love sausage, that love potatoes, this thing will change your life and possibly put you in the hospital one day with coronary problems. It's that good. Okay, so we now have this up to a heat. I like to put my stuff all the way to high heat because I'm not messing around. I'm going to take my roast and I'm literally going to lay it into this thing. Now you should be able to hear that. Now, when I do that, I'm now just going to take this and lightly cover over it. It's starting to brown now, almost immediately. I'm going to take my stock, pour it into this bowl. Any stock that you have left over, you can put it in the refrigerator, you're fine. 1 quart should do. Now, if you're a brand new deglazer and you've never deglazed before, it's okay. Everyone does it different, everyone does it their own speed. I will let this thing sit until it almost burns because I know the sounds, the smells, and the look about when it's about to get too dark. You won't know this, so you may put this stock in there to deglaze it before it's really ready. Don't worry about it. It's okay. With practice, you'll get better. The only rule is this. If you deglaze too soon, you'll just have to do it more times. If you deglaze it too late, you got to start over because you burned it. Okay. Here we go. Now, as you can see, it's just deglazing. It's just browning up really well. Now, if I turn this over right here, I want you to see something. Okay, I'm only doing this just to show. Normally I wouldn't do this. As you can see, the bottom of the meat is beginning to brown. And then there's this browning that is sticking to the bottom. Now I can scrape it off, but what I want to do instead is I want to do this. I want to take and add it to this. When I do that, you're going to get a reaction. A lot of steam, of course, but you can see the reaction. See the bubbling action? Now if I move this now, it's gone. The reaction of the stock hitting the bottom of the pan And the rapid temperature change between the two caused all of the browning that actually attached to the bottom of the pan to release and become part of the stock. So here's the key. You put that stock in there, but you have it at such a high heat that this is going to immediately begin to evaporate. The water is going to come out of the stock, leaving just the stock, the actual stock itself in the pot to become less and less fluid and more of the gravy is essentially what you're doing. So what I'm going to do now is I have browned one side. I'm now going to flip this thing over. Now, some people, not everybody, but some people will look at this and go, well, they'll look at that and they'll say, that's brown enough. Put it in the oven. Nope. We're not even close. That was just the first round. I said that the prep and actual cooking of this dish is between 35 and 40 minutes. That is true. If I really want to do it the right way, it can go over an hour. I'll sit here in a chair and read a book, watch a YouTube video, watch some Twitch, and just listen and deglaze for as long as I want. The longer you do it, the more you do it, the more often you do it, the richer the gravy will be, the more flavorful it will be. Now, I'm trying to do this as a demonstration, so I have the heat way up. You don't have to have the heat this high. You have to have enough heat to where there's a difference enough to deglaze, but you don't want to do such a high heat that you can easily burn things before you can get going. You use your judgment. If you're more adept in the kitchen, go for it. If you're hesitant, start off at about medium to high heat. Don't do full blast heat. And please take care of yourself. Don't sit your face over the pot like this when you deglaze. The steam will scald you. That's how steam works. Yeah, I'm the coon-ass Alton Brown. I know. Okay, let's see. Okay, while that's cooking real quick, let's talk about a few things. Rice. If you've never made rice, or you make rice all the time, it's not that hard. Do the right proportions of the rice. It'll tell you on the container based upon what kind of rice it is. Do those proportions into the pot. Raise the pot to a boil. Then reduce heat for 20 minutes to simmer, and you should be good. Now, I didn't even check that when I did that. And there's a reason why. I want you to hear something. I don't know if you could hear that. That's the sound of bubbling. Liquid bubbling. Boiling, for the most part. When that sound turns from bubbling to of something that sounds like it's being grilled, that means there's no more fluid in there. And without the fluid, the meat will immediately begin to go from dark brown to a burn. So I'm doing it based by ear. That's just something I'm used to. You may want to check it. If you want to check it, just watch out for the steam and check. As long as you have fluid in there, you're fine. Once the fluid goes away, yeah. Now, what I also like to do is I like to put the lid at a slight angle. This allows for the steam to leave. If you seal your pot and the steam can't get out, it will not brown down. It will just sit there and boil in the fluid. You essentially want that water to come out, leaving only the beef stock and what you've deglazed already. Because just like anything else, if we get rid of the steam and the pure water, all that's left is the brown stock and the spices, and it makes it more and more rich as you go. Okay. When you're making your rice, just whatever style you want. To be honest with you, if you're on a diet and you want to do brown rice, that's fine, go for it. It's not something that I'm really a fan of. It does change the flavor per se of the dish, because brown rice has more of a grainy flavor, and that's okay. I'm not going to be making the rice right now because I usually make the rice right before we eat. But of course, there are two cultures in the world that use these rice cookers. Asian people and Cajuns. Because they're the two people, the two cultures that eat rice more than any other one. So, around here, a traditional wedding gift, or a gift if you ever get your first apartment or your first house, someone in your family will give you a rice cooker. That's just a tradition because two reasons. One, hey, you're on your own, you're going to be cooking your own food, and we know what you're going to cook. You're going to cook Cajun food. Here's a rice cooker. Two, I don't want you borrowing my freaking rice cooker. Here's your own. That's pretty much why we do that. You can hear it. It's not just, it's not a rumble boil, a blah 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 boil. It's more of a light boil. Why? There's less fluid. The fluid is it's changing its pitch. The higher the pitch, you know you're losing water. Once you get to that sound, you're out of water, you need to be prepared to deglaze. So we're going to keep doing that. Now, wait a minute. Old school nerd. I literally chopped all these onions, bell peppers, celery, and garlic in here. What are we doing this for? Well, one thing you can do, and some people do because they have that level of skill, but that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to teach anybody to cook Cajun. What we're going to do is we're actually going to add those vegetables as part of the deglazing process on one of the last two times we do it. And here's the reason why. If you had onion and meat and you were browning both, which one burns first? The onions. You don't want to burn your onions trying to get brown on your meat, so we don't do them together. Some people can. I wouldn't advise it. Okay, you can hear the sound. It's getting faster. It's getting higher pitch. If we check it right now, there's a lot less fluid in that pot, and the fluid's very dark. There was about 1.5 inches of fluid to begin with. Now it's almost gone. It's getting louder, and it's getting higher. It's almost to a point where it's going to start to burn. There's almost no more fluid in there. So, let's deglaze. Ladle in the pot. I usually do 2. And there we go. Now we're back to that low bubble, 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 bubble. Now, what you can also do is, because I have a Magnolite pot, I know that my pot is not going to be so thin that everything burns and sticks really fast. So I'm going to now take my spatula. I don't have to, but I'm going to hold, make sure you got one of these, hold my pot, and I'm gonna just kind of scrape with the grain of this way, not against it, with the grain. And all I'm doing is I'm just running it along the bottom. Now what I'm feeling for, you're not gonna be able to see anything. There's fluid in there, and there's steam, and everything's cooking, and there's a roast sitting there. But what I'm doing is I'm moving the spatula along the bottom, and I'm feeling if there's any textures. If the glazing is going well, when you deglaze, the pot will be clean because all of the glazing has come off with the process and is in the fluid. If you're feeling ripples or textures, that means some of that is still stuck to the bottom and you're not deglazing in a high enough heat, or you're not waiting long enough. Whatever the case, just go ahead and lightly scrape it back off and it'll be fine. You want to know how I know all this? I've burned a lot of roasts. That's how you learn, by ruining it. How do you learn how to tank and wow? By wiping things. So, we talked about the onions and bell pepper. We're getting close to that. Now, we're deglazing, doing this thing. We've been doing this for what? How long has the stream been? About 35 minutes. So we're doing pretty good. We're getting close. Now, I'm going to reduce the heat because I want it to stop boiling only so I can show you what it looks like without all the steam getting in the way. I'm not sure if you can really see it very well. I'm going to try to move this off of the heat so we can see it. There we go. Now, as you can see, it's very, very dark. And that's what you want. It's dark. The meat is doing very, very well. Now, we're about halfway done. Halfway done. We've done one side. We're going to do the other. I'm going to flip it again. Be very careful when you flip it again, because the gravy you've created is going to be pretty hot. Same process as before. We're going to increase our heat, put our lid back on top, slightly kiltered to where it allows steam to escape. We're going to let it evaporate. Now, we've already deglazed 3 times. The average that I like to do is at least 6, 3 and 3. That way, you know, you at least have a decent gravy. Now, technically, everything should be spiced properly. If it's too spicy or too salty for your taste, there are 2 things you can do. 1, you can add just a little bit of water for the saltiness, but then it makes everything kind of thin. Put a potato in, or 2, or 3. There's nothing wrong with that, and the potatoes will absorb the salt eventually. So that's something you can do. If you intend to do this with potatoes and carrots instead of rice, you may want to season to taste once the potatoes are done absorbing whatever salt was in there. Me, myself, because there is a trick, and I'm going to tell you what the trick is now. Okay, when you're cooking, sometimes you will overspice things or you will oversalt things. Do not panic. Because when you're tasting these items in the gravy themselves, remember, you're putting them over rice. Rice has a tendency to be very bland. So when you put this over rice, it'll lose a lot of that spice. So be careful if you're too worried about making it too spicy or too salty, and you put it over rice and everybody's like, I can't taste it because you put it over rice. Salt your rice too. Don't forget to do that. If you don't salt your rice, you can put gravy on that rice all day long and you won't taste a single thing. Okay. We're now down up to our fourth deglaze. This is what we do. Now, while we're talking about deglazing, on the next video, we're going to do an actual a recipe with a roux. Now, a roux is what we talked about earlier, where you take flour, you brown the flour to make a paste, and then you, depending upon what the recipe is, make that paste thicker and thinner. Well, that's a good sign. You should be, because I'm the one over this pot smelling it, and I want to lose my mind right now. So what you're going to do is, for the roux type sauces, we're going to do 2 ideas about roux type things. You can make your own roux. Anyone can make a roux. Not anyone can make a roux well. It's practice. It takes steady hands. It takes patience. And it takes a good sense of timing. Some people like to use roux in a jar. And you can order that online and they'll ship it to your house in a jar. There's nothing wrong with it. And there's a reason why. Some Cajuns will look at you down their nose and be like, you don't make your own roux? Well, no. Sometimes it's easier to do it in a jar, and there's another reason why. If I make a roux by hand, it might be perfect one time, and the next time it may not be as good. Consistency. Whereas if I get a roux from a jar, I know it's going to be the same way almost every time. And how I adjust to it and add to it makes the flavor. Essentially, when I make gumbos, I don't make my own roux. when I make like a stew or a courtbouillon, I will make my own roux. Gumbo, if you're trying to make a gumbo and you make roux, you're going to make so much roux that you're going to be making roux half the day for a gumbo. Oh, this is so good. It's so dang good. Can you hear it get louder? A little bit higher? Instead of that low rumble, we now have a little tss on the top. We're losing water. That's when we start paying attention. Once you start to hear it lose water and you start getting those high tones, you know you got to start checking it. It's getting really close. We are ready to deglaze. And you can see the light color bubbles. That's from the deglazing process. Now, I don't know if anyone noticed this, but you kind of start to learn this. Have you noticed that when the first time I deglazed, all kinds of steam came up and I was fighting to try to even look at the camera? But this time I deglazed and it was just a little and it settled down. That's because the first time I deglazed, there was nothing in the bottom of the pan but the meat and the browning. So there was nothing to keep the reaction from being obvious. As I do it, I'm creating more and more gravy to settle on the bottom in a thick, not a paste, but it's a thick gravy. So when you add the water, or in this case the stock, when you add the stock to it, the reaction is the same, but there's more fluid already in there, so you don't have as violent of a reaction. So the first time you deglaze, be prepared for a lot of steam and oh my God, what am I doing? It's okay, relax. If it's a little bit too much, turn down the heat. The more you do it, the less of a reaction it becomes, and that's what you want. So now we hear the low rumble again. While we're doing this one, this will be the last deglaze before we do our onions and bell peppers, so I have a real quick story to tell you. If anyone has ever heard the term coon-ass, it is a term, a derogatory term that they use for Cajuns. Every coon-ass is a Cajun. Not every Cajun is a coon-ass. Now, is it a derogatory term? It is a term of pride. Yes and no on both accounts. The term has a lot of different connotations and a lot of etymology. Not everybody really knows where it comes from. Some people say that it comes from a word that comes from the French that means a dirty prostitute. Some people say that it's a term for filth, but it's not. Actually, at the University of Louisiana here in Lafayette, a history professor actually did some study work on it, and it actually came down to a word that's called connaise, which is a French word to find things. Now, back in World War II, of course there were Cajuns, French-speaking Louisiana people, that were part of the invasion of D-Day. And they were used as translators and code talkers because their form of French was different than a normal French person. So you could think of them like the Cajun code talkers of the D-Day. And so a lot of people think that because they couldn't speak very well French, or French was heavily dialected, that the French said to you the term filthy, and the regular GIs changed the other word to coon-ass because that's what it sounded like. And that's not the case. There were Cajuns in France during the resistance way before D-Day. Those files were released just a few years ago. The OSS was putting French-speaking, native French speakers, that's their first language, into France to help find the resistance. They'd put them on the ground and find the resistance. And they were the connais, the finders. They worked with the resistance for years, trying to develop against the Germans. And they became close allies with the French. In fact, without the connais, a lot of our intelligence we needed to actually do D-Day would not have come about easily. Because if we could take someone from Delaware and teach them French, send them to France, and they get caught. Why? They're not native tongue speakers. It would be like if I learned Japanese and they put me in Tokyo during World War II. it would be too obvious. The accent would be horrible. But these Cajun men and women were native speakers. Back until the 60s and 70s, French was the primary language in South Louisiana. It was not English. It became English now, but not then. So what's happening is these Cajuns were there, and they were the Connays. After the war, these soldiers came back, and they were like, so what'd you do during the war? I was this, I was that. Well, I was a Connays. A Connay is more like a coon-ass. That's where it comes from. It's just a genuflecture of people who speak French more than English. So essentially, I'm a Cajun, but I'm not a Connays. I'm not a native French speaker. I'm a native English speaker. French would be a second or third language for me. So the term can be both one of honor and one of derogatory. It just depends how you use it. I know a lot of people, it's pretty much in social culture and worldwide culture now, the term is pretty widespread. But that's where it comes from. Okay, we are getting really, really close to finishing this off. Now, if you're worried about putting too much spice on the meat to begin with, do what you think you should. Don't overdo it. Remember, you can always add things to this after it's brown. You don't have to worry about it and just do it to taste. There's nothing wrong with changing it to taste. The only reason why I put my spices on my meat beforehand is because I'm used to it and I know exactly how much I need for this much beef. But for you, if you want to put salt and pepper to what you think it might be just for the cook, and then you taste it later and say, I need to add this, that, or the other, go ahead. You're not going to mess this up. Because you're making it for you. Nobody else cares what anybody else thinks. Okay. On this one, we're adding our onions, our bell peppers, celery, and garlic. And we're going to let that go into there on the bottom, and it's going to settle. We're just putting this in here like this. So now, when there's a cat outside, the dogs go nuts. So now, when we deglaze this one, it's gonna react with the onions and bell peppers. And this is gonna heat up and cook down real quick, and we're gonna let that do. We're gonna put the lid back on so it cooks. And that's it. Now all I have to do is I've deglazed this. I've added my onions and bell peppers. So we're going to do the deglaze one more time with the bell peppers in there, but we're going to be very careful not to over glaze them, not too long. You want to sweat them, let them permeate with the meat and everything else, but not brown them or burn them. Now, at this point, you don't want to let it get too hot. You can bring it to a boil, but don't put your heat to full blast because then you'll burn it down and everything will start sticking and burning. The key now, you've done the deglaze. Now it's the thickening. And the thickening occurs by literally doing this. I have it on a medium heat. You can see the steam coming out of the pot. If I open this up, it's a pretty good boil. Let it boil just like that. Medium heat, let it rapid boil. Check it every 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever time is good for you till you're more comfortable. As it gets down, because it's steaming, you're going to lose some fluid. As it gets further down, it's going to thicken. And that meat's going to begin to break apart and become soft and succulent and just amazing. You can use water. No more broth. Water. The more broth you add now will just increase the saltiness and the grittiness because you're not really going to be browning it, so any grittiness will stay in there. I use water. You just add water back to keep the level. Now you want to have enough gravy to almost cover the top of your roast. If you're using round steak or something that's very thin, you're making a very small rice and gravy for maybe 1 or 2 people. I'm feeding 4 people, so by feeding 4 people, I'm using a larger roast. You want to have enough fluid to where maybe just that much of the roast is sticking out, to where The boiling action is softening all of the meat. That's it. That is a Cajun rice and gravy. All you have to do now is let it cook down. The longer it cooks down, the softer the meat, the more succulent the sauce, and then you make your rice. You put your rice in the middle of the plate, and you will literally take a piece of the meat, put it on the rice, and then take a ladle or a spoon or whatever you need and put the gravy over the rice. It's going to be very thin. It's not supposed to be thick. The idea is it's supposed to go through the rice and color all the rice a nice brown. You could put as much gravy as you want. Some people like a little bit of gravy on their rice. Some people like it to where it's almost soup. But remember, the more gravy you put on it, the more flavor it will have. That includes salt and spice. For those people who want to do their potatoes and onions, now's when you put them in. You'll put your potatoes and your carrots in there. When you put your potatoes and carrots in there, bring up a little bit more water because they'll absorb water a little bit more, and let those cook down. Once it's to that point, you want to add enough potatoes and carrots in there to where it fills in the other parts of the pot that are not filled by beef. Don't bury your beef with potatoes and onions this thick on top. It won't work out. Just put enough potatoes and carrots and onions to where it just kind of fills in the cracks, and still use the same amount of water to where it's just over the top. Let that cook down for as long as you need to. Like I said, the longer it cooks, the better it will be. I'm Old School Nerd, and that is deglazing 101 in our first ever try. It's not that hard. Anyone can do it. You just have to be willing to try. And we're going to do some other ones. I intend to do a gumbo probably soon, and the Friday after Easter. Crawfish boil. The whole thing. The pot, the water, the vegetables, the crawfish, the seasoning, the table. How do you peel crawfish? How do you do it? We'll do that. So again, Old School Nerd. I'll be on tomorrow for the regular stream with me and Chewy. We're doing some more WoW. But everyone have a great day. And saucez bon.